Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
And I'm Sylvia Earle. I'm an oceanographer, explorer at the National Geographic, founder of Mission Blue, and an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for making this possible.
And this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And as usual, this is the wonder and interest part where I have to share the screen.
I wonder if she can do it.
I'm always doubtful, but
She
it looks like it
comes through.
I think I did it this time, maybe.
It's there somewhere.
Uh-oh. Why did you put it like this for me? Oh, my Lord. All right.
It does work.
I know.
Somehow.
But it's,
Yeah.
I can't pull it down. Oh, my Lord.
Mm,
Okay. Well, while I'm fooling around with this,
yes.
today we're excited to have Kerstin Forsberg with us. She is co-founder and director of Planeta Océano, an organization that empowers coastal communities and ocean conservation efforts. She's a biologist and social entrepreneur. Her work is in building participation-based platforms such as the Marine Educator Network of Peru, and has brought her international recognition. She's a Rolex Award for Enterprise Laureate.
That's really something very special.
Yes, it is. And she, oh, come on.
A little more. Yeah.
There we go. Start over again. And she is a MCAF fellow and has been presenting her work in more than 16 countries. She has a passion for manta rays and the communities and the ocean systems that support them. Welcome, Kerstin.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, Sylvia. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. It's a real honor. Thank you for the invitation.
I keep threatening to come to Peru.
You have to come. I'm here. I'm in front of the ocean right now, Sylvia. It's calling you. You have to come. We have to take you.
I hear the call.
And as everyone knows, we hear the call because the world is
blue.
Blue.
Blue. That's true. True blue. Though what you've been doing is just amazing, Kerstin. It's being in the water, understanding these animals on their own terms. Turn this off.
Now you're gonna...
Oh, does that turn off? Oh, I think it's okay. Go ahead. Nope. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
I can see the beautiful manta as well.
This is not from Peru, as you can see. It's got a beautiful coral reef. This is a trio of mantas in another part of the planet, and that would be in the Maldives, in the Indian Ocean. So how widespread are these big beauties?
So you can find mantas across the planet. They are very widespread. If you say mantas, there are two species of mantas. So we have the giant oceanic manta, the one that we have here. Am I fine with my connection? Can you hear me?
Are you there?
Yeah. So I can you hear me? Seems that it went away. Sorry, I'm at field right now. So this is the limits and challenges of being out at field as well. We don't have really good internet connection. Yeah, so what you're seeing here, you're seeing a reef manta, as you mentioned. And we have two species of mantas in the world. We have the reef manta and we have the giant oceanic manta, which is the one that I particularly work with here in Peru. And mantas are widespread. However, it seems as if their populations are pretty much localized in different places. So it doesn't mean that even though they are widespread, you'll find mantas in everywhere across and along the planet in temperate or tropical or subtropical waters. It's going to be more focused on specific areas where there are populations, as you mentioned, in the Maldives, and of course the population that we have here in Peru, right? In Peru and Ecuador, which has been named as one of the largest populations of giant mantas in the world, actually.
And in the Gulf of Mexico.
And then you have the Gulf, exactly. Then you have the Gulf of Mexico, and there's this conversation of, there's a third, potential species of giant mantas in the Gulf of Mexico as well. So there's so much that really needs to be done. The interesting thing when I first started working with mantas is a lot of people, and I think that this happens overall in the ocean, these are animals that we hear about, right, that are very charismatic, that people love worldwide, but there's just so little that we still know of them. Right? So that's why the research is so important as well.
But knowing that each one is an individual, that they have kind of biggish brains for fish.
Yeah. They're
They-
super. They're super smart. They say that they're one of the smartest of the elasmobranchs, and they have the largest proportion of the brain size in comparison to their body. There's even been studies that show that they can be self-aware. In aquariums, there's been research that they show how mantas kind of identify themselves through the reflection and kind of recognize themselves. And then when you jump into the water with a manta like this, right, it's curious, and it can come up to you, and it will look at you with those huge eyes that we're seeing there. And they're definitely, they definitely are intelligent. And I always talk about that with my daughter, right, when we're going out to the beach or we're close to the ocean and seeing these different animals. Many times we think of them as a population or as an animal, but each one of them, as you say, is unique. Each one is their own individual that has their own story, that has its own story behind and family and so forth, right? Like where it came from and in history, right? So it's really important to recognize them this way.
And just the idea that instead of just thinking of them as what, think of them as who are you? Where did you come from?
What have you been doing today, right? Like where did you come from? Where are you going to go now, right? Like what are you experiencing at that moment, right? And you can see this is actually a video. If you want to play it, see the giant manta, which is basically the size of our boat. We're out here where I am right now in northern Peru, right? And you do have these amazing encounters, and we're in this case the manta's like peacefully swimming, right? But sometimes you'll find them rushing across and feeding, right? Because northern Peru is a very important area for mantas. It's likely an important feeding area. It might even be a reproduction area. But yeah, they come with a story, right? And I think that's the critical thing for us to really understand, that it's not just an animal that's there. It comes with a story. We need to understand each unique individual. We need to understand the whole population, and they relate to us, right? We're part of this interconnected system at the end of the day.
Kerstin, isn't there also evidence that they relate to one another? That you find mantas hanging out with the same?
So yeah, so they are. You can find them specifically in aggregations. The area that we are working in here, it's really interesting because we haven't found like a specific aggregation site. It's like a huge area where a lot of them come together, a huge aggregation. But you will be able to find them like in seamounts or in reefs, as you say, and they'll revisit, right? And that's where the interesting thing comes in for scientists, right? Because you can recognize them and you can do photo IDs, and that is basically when you dive with them, and then you'll see their ventral pattern. So you'll go beneath them and you see their belly. It's kind of like for us what a fingerprint is, right? They have their own unique ventral patterns, and that way you can recognize each unique individual, and you'll have, resightings and revisits and the same manta coming back again and forming part of this community, right? That is definitely intrinsically connected. So even though many times you will see these giant oceanic mantas separate, but then you might also be able to see them in these important aggregation areas that need to be protected as well, right?
So how old would you imagine a big manta of this sort might be? Do you know how long?
So mantas, first of all, in terms of size, right? The size that we find them here would say you typically measure them from wingtip to wingtip. And the ones that we find here, I would say, are around 5 to 6 meters, up to 7 meters if you find a big one. There's been registrations of even mantas that go up to be like 9 meters, like from wingtip to wingtip, right? Like very big. Typically the females are very big. And in terms of age, there's still a lot more to do in terms of research. There's this knowledge or this theory that mantas, large adult mantas can be, maybe 45 years or older, but reach much older years in duration. And they're very long-lived. They also reproduce very slowly. And that's one of the challenges behind manta conservation, right? And behind the fact that they can get entangled or so forth, because they do reproduce very, very slowly. So that's another video of us, one of our team members actually swimming with a giant manta, and kind of like for you to understand, he's going to get down beneath the giant manta. They're very peaceful. They're very, I like to feel that they're like flying in the water, and you can see those, beams of rays of light coming from everywhere, really. And so you go beneath the manta, and that's where you're going to get to see those ventral patterns, which is some of the things that we've been collecting photos of from across the years.
Look at the twisting and turning. When you see pictures of mantas in books or drawings before the 1950s, they looked pretty static.
Yep.
Until people had been in the water with them. And I think photographer, filmmaker, Stan Waterman, he was the very first to actually film them doing this graceful ballet. And people were just blown away when they could see, and they couldn't figure out what those projections were. Called them horns, until he showed that they actually use them in feeding.
Got to kind of just like scoop.
Yeah, they curl, and maybe they do more things. Who knows?
And here the fishers will also, in a very common way, just refer to them as the horns, right? But exactly, they are the cephalic fins that they use when they're feeding, and they'll filter feed. So they'll open up their very big mouth, which is in between those two cephalic fins, like the fins from the head, right? And then they'll help, exactly, and then they'll help them to feed, and then they'll filter feed, and then they'll throw out the water, and they'll keep that zooplankton, right, which is really important. They feed on a lot of zooplankton to get that size as well, right? But yeah, the movement is, I always say it's kind of like they're very elegant, but at the same time they're very powerful, right? Because you'll see them gracefully in the water. You can also see them rushing or breaching out like very strongly, or going to depths to dive. But yeah, and we were actually today with a group of children, and yesterday working to do a mural. And the lovely thing we found with the mural was the kids were drawing the movement, right? That movement that you were describing. They were drawing like the movement of the mantas and the movement like of the water, right? And it's all part of that. And yeah, the movement just makes you feel alive, and makes it's part of their life, right?
Well, and the mantas seem like they've been in the culture for many, many, many years. What are the ages of some of these pieces?
Yeah, so these are from the Moche culture. It's a pre-Inca culture, so it comes from before of the Incas. I don't have the exact numbers right now. I think it's up to like 4,000 before Christ. I'd have to confirm that exact number. But these are part of a collection of a museum, and you can actually see this in pottery. You can see them in textiles, and it's likely that these are not only the giant mantas. It's likely that they're also the other smaller mobulas, right? So the giant manta ray is part of a genus of mobula, that there's several of these devil rays, right? They also have these cephalic fins. So you can see those there on the pottery. And it really shows that connection of the Peruvian people as an ancestral part, right? And the interesting thing here was that when I first started working with giant mantas like several years ago, it was kind of like as if that connection had been lost. Like people had lost that. Like there were a lot of people that didn't even know that giant manta rays existed in the country, and it was really kind of, sometimes I feel that it's kind of like revaluing that that connection again, right? And putting that at the showcase again. So yeah, they've been here. They've been with us for a very long time.
Well, it's really important because it seems to happen frequently that people, they kind of disconnect from the nature, and particularly in the ocean, they just sort of look out and it's the beautiful sunset, or they're sailing across, but they really need to get that face mask on and see what's below the surface to be really.
That happened here, right? And you were mentioning this Marine Educators Network of Northern Peru that we started working with schools in 2009, and that was kind of like the initial part, because it was like you have these schools that are in front of the ocean, right? They have these amazing beaches, they have this water, but many people don't really know what is in there, right? So it's really about gaining that connection again, and that ultimately leads to, just pride, right? Like general source of pride of like what's there and what I can learn from and what I can do. Like today, these kids were telling me, like, because we've been participating in like school parades or things like on ocean life, it helps us understand that we can set out goals and that we can achieve them, right? So it's really about understanding that you have that potential to create change or to do whatever you really want to do. Right?
I saw that I read one of your videos or something, or saw one of your videos where you talked about the two children, Andy and Jorge.
Yes.
And you just kind of like say, hey guys, you want to go out and swim with the manta rays? And they thankfully remained curious and said, yes, let's go. And how did that pan out?
That was amazing. And it's great because I think that many times because these animals are so big, right? And that's one of the photos of the harvest, right? But because the mantas were so big, we can talk about the harvest too. I think that people can be afraid, right? But of course the manta is harmless, right? So it's not going to come up and attack you. It doesn't have like a sting, right? Like the stingray, like it's lost it through evolution, and it's really something that of course performed safely, right? You have to have certain parameters when you're swimming with giant megafauna, but they lost that fear immediately, right? And it's kind of like something, and we've had that with a lot of volunteers that come and work with us. It's like once they see a manta, they're kind of like transformed forever, right? It's just kind of like changes the way they see things. And since Jorge and his colleague came back, they started painting murals, and then we ran this interpretation center, which actually we're unfortunately trying to revamp because we had heavy rains that hit, but we did this giant manta ray structure for people to come and see actually a giant manta in real life, right? Like the real size giant manta. And then we've had like teachers that go out and connect with the mantas and see them, like even from the boat, right? And get excited and come back and talk to the kids. So yeah, definitely having that connection with nature changes a lot.
Why were they called devilfish?
So honestly, I think it has to do a lot with the whole, these cephalic fins, and like we don't call them here, so they're not commonly called here devilfish. It's like in general, like I guess that common name exists in like many other parts. Like here it was more like like manta, and manta would be for like everything, right? They would all be mantas. So yeah, so that was also like a part of our work, and we do with the fishers as well, like understanding that they're all the mobulid rays kind of face very similar threats. They're all they reproduce very slowly, but however it is important to recognize the different species, right? And so like what the different mobula species are, like the smaller ones, what the large, but I think that overall the devil kind of comes from its appearance, which actually has nothing to do with the devil, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. But yeah, we did talk a little bit about the grim side of this, where these beautiful big fish were just kind of seen as something to eat locally or to bring in.
So that was at the very beginning of our work, and we actually kind of like the way in which we started working with giant mantas was I had already been working in these fishing communities for several years. I actually started 2007. I was a undergrad biologist. Like I had just finished my undergrad school. I was 22 years old. So I would drive these buses to get here to Tumbes, which is like a 22-hour drive to get here. And we kind of started with the community. And while we were working in the community several years later, I received this call that a researcher, a colleague that had gone to Ecuador, and she had tagged the giant manta. The manta had come over to Peru, and it's very likely that it had been harvested. We could never prove that, but that tag, finding that tag, because we did a huge campaign to find that tag, one kind of showed that there was this connection between the mantas in northern Peru and the mantas in Ecuador. And that led us to be more curious and bring up on more partners, and so we started doing research of the fisheries. What's going on with the mantas? At that time, mantas were not legally protected in Peru. They were in Ecuador, but they would swim towards Peru, and then mantas have no borders, and then here they would be harvested, and it would be either for like intentional catch, so they would even be harpooned, or it would be bycatch. And as we talked about this, there's those species that have small populations that reproduce very slowly. And I remember the fisher, to the photo on the right, he would say, you know what, I actually do want to learn more about this, because he harpooned mantas. He had no idea of that these were, at that time vulnerable, now endangered, right, threatened species. And he would go out and he would harpoon the mantas just because they're a low-income community that demands food, right, and feeding and livelihoods and subsistence. And then when he would be harvesting the manta, he would harpoon it, and then when he would open it, it would have a pup inside.
Oh,
And so he
terrible.
would say, this happens to me a lot, right? There are always mantas with pups inside, and we've found and documented that. So, I mean, potentially this is an area which is important for reproduction also of the mantas, and we need to take care of those pups, right? And those mamas and everyone, right? So that was kind of what led us to continue working on, okay, let's get, let's study this population more, let's legally protect it. But these images now, even though they're kind of hard, like it's still a very big challenge, because there still is bycatch, and that's something that it's a threat that we're still are working. And that photo there is just like a kind of mix of a collage of different things. So we actually put together this proposal to do a legal protection that was to the government. We sent it over in 2013, and we actually got silence. We had no reply. It was really interesting that the whole process of this, and a lot of what we do in Planeta Océano was really interesting, because this proposal was done together with like young professionals, like early career professionals, right? Undergraduate volunteers, like we were like a group of like young people coming together and working on this. And then, of course, that manta there, you can find that it was found by a fisher called Educator Cruz. And Edgardo was out fishing, and the manta got entangled. So he wasn't intentionally catching, it got entangled. And it was like lifted up by a crane in, the era of social media. It got viralized everywhere, and people were like, what happens, right? And so that was, I always say that this is kind of like the manta hero. Because this manta allowed us to get more leverage through the media, and that's where the powerful importance of positive media comes into place. And so I went out on the news and I was like, we've put together this proposal since 2013. We haven't received a response. Government, we really want to work with you. We want to get this out. And then very next day, I received a call from the Ministry of Fisheries, of the Vice Ministry of Fisheries, saying like, we want to work with you. We want to get this going. And it was actually fairly quick. And then you found, people from the government that were kind of like racing to get this legislation out. And that also kind of like set a bar to other species that we've been working with as well, like to get legislation out for critically endangered large-fin sawfish. And then also like whale sharks were also protected. But there was this kind of like knowledge within the governmental system as well. And it was all through, engagement of everybody, right?
Yeah, and I think it was a really important story, because as I recall, the fishermen, made the decision to bring this manta in with the expectation that he'd have a big payday for the animal. And
exactly.
in fact,
he got very limited. He got very limited funds. I think it was like $200 or so. That he got very, very limited funds for all the effort that he had put in place. But the interesting thing here is, and I think that we'll have photos of him later, is like, Edgardo is now one of our Manta ambassadors.
right.
We went out, we talked to him, and he's now he's taking us out to the water tomorrow, right? He's part of the team. He's brought together a group of fishers that are putting this together. So it's many times I think it is there's when you talk about these environmental challenges, it's really important to recognize the causes. And so definitely knowledge is key, right? And people didn't know that these were threatened animals. But then there's also a lot of other things, right? Including, values and attitudes and opportunities that you can get to communities, like how these are very, very low income communities, right? That they basically were fishing out of subsistence, right? There's other parts and other challenges of the world which have decimated populations, and, basically 90% of populations that go because of the gill plate trade. In this case, it's more of the local fishers that really need fish, and that we need to help them also to provide alternatives, right? So that's kind of, and that's one of the fetuses that we found. This was actually, we were just arriving on the airplane, came down to Tumbes here when we were working north in Peru, which is a very important area, by the way. Parenthesis, it's very close to Hope Spot as well, Sylvia, as you know. And And we were here, and they called us, and they were like, they just captured the giant manta. And luckily, one of the fisheries officers that he was enforcing, he was a past volunteer of ours. So it's kind of, that story, that long-term involvement and collaboration with community members. And he already knew about this. So the fishery officer was like, no, I have to call Kerstin, right? And you're not taking the manta anywhere, right? And so we initially went out thinking that we could just collect samples, right? We wanted samples from like what the manta was feeding on or whatever. And we would never, ever imagine that manta was going to have a pup inside, right? And so when we opened out, like the pup was there, and that's what we, ended up publishing. But this manta was harvested. I mean, it was taken to shore. It was incidentally entangled. So that's one of the key things that we are working on now, because we kind of got to this point where indeed, we need to learn more about the manta and recognize it. And now it's kind of like sort of becoming a flagship for marine conservation, right, in northern Peru and we have the legislation, but that won't, mantas can still get entangled in fishing nets. Like whatever legislation that you have, bycatch and incidental, capture can still exist. So now we're really strongly working to try to find ways to mitigate that bycatch, right? And reduce those interactions, because that's going to be the only way that we will be able to fully save this population.
Start by eating something other than the fish. And actually, most of the fish caught are not consumed locally. They're marketed. They're taking fish for money, not for food. And
yeah, a lot of these low-income populations do take, like they do feed on the kids, like it's their source of protein, right? So it is a big, because we are talking about very small scale vessels. We're not talking about like big vessels or anything.
The principal entanglement issue is because of the industrial fishing, not the local fishing. There is some, but
yeah, but these entanglements happen with gill nets.
Yeah.
Right. So these are small scale gill nets. The thing is that the gill net also is not very selective. So it's really about, so the thing for us is really using the manta as kind of like a flagship to try to transform, it's not just about manta conservation. I always say that, like, I love mantas and I adore mantas, but at the end, the thing is try to help communities to transform themselves, right? To have more sustainable livelihoods. And so right now, one of the things that we are doing, and here actually in this slide, and we just had this meeting today. So we've actually partnered with Earth Ranger, which is from the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And so one of the things that we've been doing for some time is working with fishers to help them, monitor their own activities, to start develop management actions and, solutions that we can get to these activities. There's when one of our divers there swimming with the mantas, and then we had a small little binational workshop with colleagues from the government and fishers from Ecuador that came over because we're part of the same population. And now with Earth Ranger, what we're doing is we're actually going to be equipping fishers with cell phones. And so it's not just about reporting sightings of mantas or bycatch of mantas, but it's really about reporting their fishery overall, right? So it really is kind of like helping from that, very grassroots overall level in terms of how can we provide more sustainable livelihoods for these communities.
And how are they thinking about, they must be seeing sort of an uptick in people that want to come and actually see the mantas alive, through diving tourism and
exactly
tourism, and looking at.
So that was, that was a very big thing for us, and that was what we were promoting, especially and we still are, in terms of, okay, we want to protect these mantas, but their value is much higher alive than dead, right? In every single level, right? Not just like on the moral and ethical, but even like on the economical, right? Like they'll be able to develop more with ecotourism. And so we actually equipped a formal association of fishers, and these association of fishers were providing infrastructure and loans for their boats, and not just the fishers, but like community members. So we provided loans for like a local lodging. We supported like local artisans, and so that kind of like started growing into a very small but powerful ecotourism story where you had people from abroad. And it was amazing to see because we would go out with them, and then you would find, for example, Edgardo, right, that he used to capture him. He captured a manta before, and then you would see him on the boat with a tourist, and the tourist, of course, is excited, like, look at a manta, and you see the faces of the fishermen too. Oh, there's the manta. It's just about feeling that, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, the pandemic like hit us very hard, right? So like everything that we had started building, right, tourism went to like zero. So we're at this point at this moment where we are really working very strongly to try to refloat that. And it's definitely a solution. And plus, I mean, that's why you have to come, Sylvia. Plus, this area is magnificent, not just because of the mantas, right? But you'll be able to go out and you'll see whale sharks, and you'll see whales, and you'll see dolphins, and it really isn't.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also a premium that is for just protecting life in the ocean because of the climate connection.
Yeah, that's a lot of carbon.
International Monetary Fund.
Exactly. We're kind of like, I mean, people are like, doing these huge dialogues of like, how can we, of course, right, like mitigate and adapt and kind of, but if you save, the ocean life, right, it is a lot of carbon in there.
Keep it safe. In planting trees, that helps, of course, we know about that, but it's a bit of a piece of the circle that you have to explain. I mean, mantas and whales and sharks and tunas don't generate oxygen, but they create the fertilizer that powers the phytoplankton that not only creates food, but also oxygen is produced. And the circle goes round and round. When you break those links, and we have, so that the numbers with sharks, and I don't know what it is with mantas globally, but their numbers are certainly far less than when before.
They've decreased a lot. Yeah, it's thought that the global trend, and this is by IUCN, the global trend between a 50% to at least like a 70, more than 70% of decrease over the last 3 generations of mantas. However, there are areas where there's been like a decrease, as I said, like in 80 or over 90%. So
you can eliminate them totally. Yeah.
And there's a lot of like, when people are talking about climate change and environmental conservation is like intrinsically linked, right? Because we do need to engage and make sure that this carbon is still in the water, like in the form of life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Kids get it right away, but if you don't kind of get it in your mind as a part of your common understanding of how the world works, it's hard. A little tougher with some grown-ups.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're a little more convincing from kids.
I think that, that's why we work a lot with kids, and I get like super excited with kids. Like it's one of my favorite parts of my day, working with kids. But yeah, I think that's why we like a lot of what we do is really try to provide those opportunities for people to learn, but also contribute, right? So like in those photos, for example, I mean, to the bottom you're seeing like students, like university students that are going out and measuring these fish by themselves and like understanding, right, like what's going on with these species. Then of course working with scientists, right, that have a lot of information but need to also get information from the fishers, right? And that's Edgardo there actually, who was the our main Manta ambassador. Then you have like volunteers that are like collecting plankton, right, that which is what the mantas feed on. So we really need to understand like the whole ecosystem approach. It really is about providing that platform for participation for everyone, right? For everybody to have the chance to contribute from their own ways and their own perspectives.
Yeah, and and studying the plankton is critically important, as you say, because there's so much that is out there other than plankton. You've got a lot of the microplastics and other trash that's coming into the ocean that they can get.
It's the basis of everything, basically. So we really need to understand what is in there, right? And many times I think that what happens, and this is why it was interesting, like many times, at least here in Peru, there's typically been a large focus, at least for like governmental funded organization science, more in terms of species that are of commercial importance, right? But we really need to understand the whole ecosystem, right? And so yeah, plankton is definitely a very, very important, and it's actually very cool as well. Like once you see them on the microscope, it is really, really interesting, right?
Dimension to life.
There's nothing quite as exciting as getting a bunch of kids and dumping some plankton under the microscope, and they're like, oh my God, that guy just ate that other guy. And better than any video game they could imagine, let me tell you.
And the forms that they have and everything, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. But it's just so, I mean, it must be really gratifying to see so many of the people within the, traditionally the manta hunters or harvesters now becoming real champions and ambassadors or guardians for them, and seeing
yeah, I think
that true economic.
Yeah, it is definitely, one of the most gratifying things, I mean, for me, and kind of like becoming Manta ambassadors on their own terms, right? Because I think that that's where the real empowerment and the real change comes. Not when you come and you tell somebody, what they need to do, but it's kind of like, it's kind of like more, these are the challenges, these are the issues. It's kind of like problem-based learning, right? It's like, what can you do? What do you think? And then they become empowered from the idea because they are leading it themselves, right? Like Educator is leading these efforts with the other fishers. Like the teachers that we work with are leading these efforts in the school. The youth that we work with are leading their own environmental projects. So they feel it like it's theirs, right? It really is theirs. So like the change is, they notice that the change is in their own hands as well. And that's where change comes, right?
Right.
When it's really that level of citizen participation as well.
And I think it could really help them to resist when you get one of these big, foreign fishing fleets that wants to come in and say, yeah, I'll build you a new school, or I'll fix the library, put it into some clinic or whatever. Just give us all your fishing rights,
And that was what we were very afraid of at that time, because luckily there was no gill plate trade in Peru. Right. And so, this big Asian market that has been, exterminated, lots of populations. And we were at this precise time to do that legal protection for that fishery. Avoid that. Right. Exactly. Because then you were going to be, it was still challenging. All of these things are super challenging to do, but that was going to have an extra level of challenge. Right. It was going to be like, fighting against this huge monster, which we can still do. Right. But it's, yeah. So luckily that gill plate trade didn't enter Peru. But yeah, it's just well, Sylvia can talk about that lifelong commitment. It's a very long-term process, right? It takes a long time.
But we don't have a lot of time to turn it around. We don't. Things are moving so fast. The goal in 7 years, by 2030, to have as much as 30% of land and sea highly fully protected in order to have a stable climate, in order to stem the biodiversity loss. I mean, we're on track right now to lose 1 million species of creatures, and that doesn't even count the ones we don't have names for yet, that are getting lost in bycatch or getting lost when a forest is burned, that we haven't really explored. But what we do know is that we need them, but now they need us to look at a manta for more than its gill rakers, or more than pounds of meat, or whatever it is, a trophy. I mean,
Oh God,
there's still
that people that do it. Unbelievable.
What about this gill raker thing? What
the gill plates?
It's an Asian market.
It is, but it's not even an ancestral thing. It's developed over the last decades, right? It isn't something that comes from like millennials or something, like millennia years ago. But it's
thing. No.
Exactly. There's absolutely no evidence of any sort of, benefit, but yeah, I completely agree with you, Sylvia. Like in terms of, on one side, of course, change takes time, but we need to be very strong and ambitious and, move the needle quick, right? And I was talking about this, today that we were at this school, right? Seeing all these kids. So we had these, it was wonderful. I've been working with schools for a very long time. And so we went to the school that we worked with, and the kids that I first started working with in 2009 now are university students, right? And they're studying forestry, and they're studying, they're doing a lot of things, right? And so they came back and we had this amazing reunion. Like I was crying, you know, it was amazing. And you see those, you know, you see those changes in them, right? And you just think about like, what if, you know, all these kids, like all the kids across the world could have access to these opportunities, right? And come back, I mean, in 10 years time, and just like transform their communities, right? And the same thing for like the fishers, right? That we're planning this work with them, like, and we're starting with a very pilot project to really understand and transform the fisheries. Like, what if we could have all the small scale fishers involved, you know, and put them in, and it is really about, you know, joining forces, and that's where collaboration and everything comes in, right? So yeah, that's one of the girls at one of the students at the schools. She's actually mapping out the migration pattern of a giant manta there.
Yeah, what we're looking at here.
Yeah, it looks like it's going from Galapagos to Ecuador, huh?
So
we actually tagged it. We tagged it in Tumbes, here where I am right now. And so this was a collaboration with Stanford University, and it was supported by Rolex as well, as part of the Rolex Awards. And what we did was we really wanted to understand what the giant mantas were doing. We already had kind of an idea of where they were in the water. We had been, you know, going out to the water to sight them, but there had never done this like satellite telemetry in Peru. So we placed a few tags on some mantas, and we kind of followed their movement, both in terms of horizontal movement, where they're going, and also how they were diving. And so here you can find there are two different individuals. The one to the left shows you how it's going up and down from the continent in you know, between Tumbes, which is that northern Peru area, and Ecuador. It's just going, it has no borders, right? It's just going 1 month to one place, going the other. And then you can see the one going from northern Peru, from Tumbes all the way to Galapagos Islands. And you see those, you know, that long migration. You see that while it's passing through different countries. You need that binational collaboration. It's also passing, Sylvia, through areas beyond national jurisdiction, areas where there's nobody there, right? And so there's this need to really, you know, strengthen that. And then coming into, and you know, I'm also part of a network. I run Planeta Océano, which is a nonprofit, but I'm part of a network called Migramar, where we're working on migratory corridors across the Eastern Pacific. And it really shows how we have to, you know, expand those corridors. So for example, right now, when you talk about the Hope Spot in northern Peru, that has a marine protected area that hopefully will come out this year in northern Peru. It's a really important tropical ecosystem. But thinking ambitiously for the future, right? Yes, of course, we need to have an MPA and a Hope Spot here in Peru, but we also need to establish those corridors, right? We also need to start thinking about how we're going to protect the whole migration patterns. So I think that little girl there might have those tools in the future. And so what we did was, what we do is we try to translate this science, this complex science, and take it to the people, right? And so here the girl is learning, and it's helping out her own school studies, right? Because this is in geography class that you need to learn how to map out coordinates, but she's mapping out and understanding how a giant manta ray is moving. Before, she would look out in the ocean and see that it was just like an ocean. Now she knows the giant manta rays are there, and she feels that she can map it out. She feels that it's, you know, easy, and that she can do it one day, right? So it's really about engaging that science like into schools and working with kids.
Absolutely. And you know, the instead of just having kids that kind of grow up in a small community like that and leave, you know, these are ways and means that you bring them back, they're engaged, they, you know, not necessarily becoming, you know, extractors of the environment, really becoming
they can
caring for it.
exactly access this technology, right? And access all these different opportunities. So yeah, that's just an example of how
You want to see manta rays from submersibles, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, we do.
Imagine
I want to go when you're
sitting there and watching these guys for like long periods of time.
We don't know how
around.
deep they go, I think.
No, I don't think we do. I don't really know how deep the giant mantas go.
They do different types of, and I'm not sure in the next slide you can find one of the research that we did with the diving. And this is in Spanish, just for those that don't know Spanish, but otherwise we can practice because we need to be bilingual. And so the mantas, what we found out in northern Peru with those precise tags, was what they were doing is something called reverse style vertical migration. What does this mean? They were spending a lot of time, and this is just an infographic, of course we have the data that we have from the research, right? But they were spending a lot of time during the day at the surface. And then during nighttime, they were going up and down, likely maybe to feed, and going up to, you know, up to depths. I think I believe of 1,000 meters. One got to go to. But a lot of time at the surface as well. So they'll go up and down, and that's where the interactions with the gill nets can come into place, right? And it's really dangerous for them because they'll spend a lot of time at the surface. But it's really curious because they do have, it seems that they have a pattern for the dive. And now there's like, we're collaborating with, you know, international researchers that are doing a lot of research, not just in terms of like the horizontal movements, but also the vertical movements. What's going on? How do they dive, right? And how does that relate to bycatch or some of these issues? But this was carried out with Stanford with a colleague, Dr. Barbara Block, and Sami Andersak, who was the lead author. And something that Sami said, which was really nice that I loved, was it's kind of like as if the manta is like during the night, kind of like, you know, putting her head inside like a fridge, right? Like going down, and then because it's cold, it has to come back up again and kind of like get a bit warmer, right? And then going down. So that's the theory behind this. Of course, it's a hypothesis that we have to start testing out more and doing more research, right? But yeah, lots of interesting things to learn about.
We know for sure that many species in the deep sea, they do this big vertical migration every night.
Yeah.
Because they're coming up to feed, but they're also probably getting fed upon by the mantas. But you get that big mixing, and you just think about the value of the manta with its big size, just kind of mixing the water, you know, from the different levels, and it's a really important role they play.
All these, you know, small, well, kind of small interactions. If you think about our whole globe, right? But how they sum up to really have this, you know, life support system that you always talk about, Sylvia, right? Like it's all these things that are happening in the ocean that are keeping us alive as well, right?
Absolutely.
So now we have to keep the ocean alive.
And here's like the path forward. Just look at these great kids. They're all with the shark. And so what is the manta sign? Is it this? You know?
yeah. You were doing this. But yeah,
the shark.
This
is the manta. Yeah.
Maybe this.
I love it.
This is
yeah.
The manta's like
exactly. Yeah, we do that too. We do that. Very peaceful and very graceful. And yeah, and kids love that. Exactly. And then, you know, swimming up and circling, right? Because it will dive and it will go, you know, it will do these lovely like circles. But yeah, so that's actually one of the teachers from our network going out seeing the manta. Then kids doing these lovely parades, you know, manta fairs that we've had. We have this amazing project called Connecting Schools, where what we do is we bring together kids across from different geographies. So we actually did some with schools in the US. We've done it with schools in Costa Rica, with schools in Ecuador. And the kids are kind of motivated to develop their own projects, to do their own things, but also connect between each other. Because there's this big thing that we really want to promote in them is that the ocean is just, you know, this one big ocean that's connected, right? So it's not just what happens in your community, but it is part of a, you know, one big ocean. So whatever happens in your community, there's also something that will, you know, trickle down to like the other community and having them come together. So yeah, those are just some of the things that we do with the kids and that we've been doing across the years, right, since 2009.
Yeah, I just love this because it really opens up the pathways for there to be, you know, more connectivity between the different countries that need to support these swimways. Because instead of being like, I don't know, Facebook friends or Instagram followers or pen pals, they can be manta buddies, you know.
They're manta buddies. And the cool thing here is also like what we do with our messaging is, again, the messaging comes from the community itself, right? So we're obviously, you know, it is like a learning exchange. We're coming and we're teaching about what we know about mantas, but they're teaching us about what they know about the communities. And the kids here are teaching the adults, right? So they're going on the street and and so that message, I mean, the message is heard more when it comes from somebody within your community, right? So the kids are the ones that are providing the messages to the adults and kind of like leading this forward, right?
But you know, your comment I saw somewhere that even removing 10 mantas from a group can just have a devastating effect on the
social structure.
The social structure, and you think about you know, and if you're talking to like a group of kids or the community, you say, well, you know, which 10 are going to be gone from the community? You know, what kind of an impact would that have? It's really dramatic.
And you never know, like in terms of genetics, right? And yeah, I mean, it in theory, there's this recent from colleagues, that recent paper that apparently this population would be one of the largest in the world with over 22, like there's a calculation, a modeling of over 22,000 individuals, but there's been like approximately like 2,000 or more sightings in Ecuador, like direct photo IDs, right? But each of these individuals counts like for a unique reason, and also even like, you know, for the inbreeding and everything, you have to be really careful, right?
Yeah, otherwise you end up like a situation we have with cheetahs or some other animals we look at, and they start to suffer from, you know, the lack of genetic diversity.
Yeah. So I was a part of the time when whalers were exploited and celebrated more. If whalers were celebrated, whales were being exploited. And I watched the change. And finally in 1986, commercial whaling, it came to a halt, a global moratorium. We need to do the same thing for sharks.
Yeah.
Stop killing them. In mantas, just stop killing them. And look at the other victims.
It's a big issue. It's a big issue. Like, so mantas are just an example of all of the threats that the elasmobranchs are facing, right? And the shark finning and the shark fisheries and the shark and ray, right? Like all these different like elasmobranchs in general. It is, to be honest, a very big challenge in Peru because there's a huge fishery for sharks and rays, right? And so a lot of this is like, you know, small scale fisheries to an extent, but they're not so small scale, right? And so there's this need to, again, provide these creative solutions, right? And the work behind that, because it's, to my opinion, it is about, yeah, you can do a management plan, you can do, you know, some sort of legislation, but you need to have this social dynamic, social structure in place to, you know, empower these people to follow and reinforce and commit to whatever legislation that needs to be done, right? And if that is, for example, looking into fishers here, like very, very small scale fishers, that they harvest, you know, elasmobranchs from time to time, it's not their key target, but kind of like providing alternatives, looking at what you're gonna do, right? Kind of thinking about things, thinking about issues in a very comprehensive way that will allow, you know, that change to happen. And this is one of the examples with the mantas, right, that we did. It wasn't just about, you know, there's going to be a ban on mantas. It's like, of course, yeah, we're going to work on this ban on mantas, but we're going to support the community to really value the manta as we do that, right? And then you have painting murals with Jorge, Edgardo, you know, preparing, you know, his dish with onions, like on board, the artisans, and, you know, that giant manta structure that I said that we really need to get fixed. And that's Jorge as well, like older, right? And yeah, it really is about having that multidisciplinary approach and participatory approach to things, as you say, and that's the shark fishery, right? Like, I mean, that's what sharks and mabues, and that's what we deal with, right? And Peru has a national plan of action for sharks and rays. Like we're really trying to see how we can kind of like support and move that forward. But it is a very big challenge, right? So we need a lot of hands to support moving that.
Yeah, and the, you know, all these animals that are just
The sawfish.
sawfish is just so awful to see them like that.
Sawfish got to be extinct, and this was actually part of another effort that we had in which we worked with young, you know, students. They patrolled basically Peru and Ecuador, reported sightings from fishers. The sawfish was thought to be extinct in Peru and other areas of the country. That was a sighting from a local fisher that was like, you know, the power of citizen science, right? Like it's here, it's back. And then our surveys also showed that it's here. Those little teeth, those actually teeth that, this is really strange, transformed into kind of like things for cockfighting. So they put it on the cockfighting, right? So that's very strange. And so what we're working on now, this is kind of like a similar story to the mantas. We worked with the communities, we were able to work with the government, get the national legislation out, but actually we're at this next stage at this moment where we are working to develop a regional strategy for sawfish. And so we've already gotten governments and organizations and scientists on board for across the Eastern Pacific region, which is one of the regions that has the most threat to like this population of sawfish is very threatened. And hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to have a draft that we can help move forward for the region to kind of recover and protect these amazing species.
Hopefully it won't take 3 years.
Hopefully we're rushing. We're rushing.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
And the turtles as well, right? I mean, I think going into the fact that right, giant mantas, I mean, they're super important as flagships, but it's really about that empowerment on every single level. That's actually how I started. Like I was 22 at that time, like, you know, looking at the sea turtles that were being stranded on the beaches, engaging. We had over 100 volunteers in less than a month. Fishers that were reporting incidentally caught sea turtles and releasing them. So it's kind of like having everybody play their own part, right?
Yeah, it's all part of the big picture in protecting these, you know, these really iconic big species. And what about the Convention of Migratory Species? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so CMS, a lot of things. That's the turtle, and we'll have that later. We have been doing some work with these, you know, kind of like conventions. Actually, the one that I'm really excited about at this moment is what Sylvia mentioned in terms of this 30 by 30, right? And actually, Alfredo, my team member, he's going to be participating at a CBD meeting, and in terms of like this, you know, Montreal biodiversity framework, and trying to see, because, and we've already been talking in Peru, like how can we support you to get to that 30 by 30, right? And so we had meetings at you know, the Our Ocean conference with the minister and with like other colleagues, and trying to see how we can get Peru to be more ambitious in that. I think that in terms of these things like CITES and CMS and things, I mean, I think that our country, at least Peru, like has been kind of like, of course, complying with these international conventions, but there is this huge opportunity, like need, but I would also see opportunity to demonstrate real strong leadership, right? So that's where we're at the point. Like we want to make sure that Peru, like whenever everybody talks about, you know, marine conservation in Peru, like they'll talk about Peru as the most productive marine, you know, system in the world. But I also want people to talk about Peru as, you know, the leader in marine conservation, right? So that's kind of like, that's our goal, and bringing people together, and that's just the photo showing kind of, you know, these people coming together and understanding and talking together and recognizing that we can assess challenges and then build them up together, right?
Absolutely.
That's the habitat right there. That's where mantas live.
That's where you live, right? Every time somebody said, where do you live? Ocean, Earth.
Exactly, that's where we are. It's just, you know, that's just one planet, right?
Yeah, it really is amazing.
It's so great to see you, Kerstin. This is more of a promise than a threat. I'm going to come.
I'm waiting for you, and I'm going to text you every day, Sylvia. You have to come. It's wonderful to see you as always, and wonderful to hear from you and everything. And you know that, you know, I've told, and you can come with, of course, Liz, you're more than invited. And I've already talked to you, Sylvia, as well. Like you've definitely been, you know, a huge inspiration to me and to all our generation, right? And reading your books kind of like, you know, made me do the things that I've been doing now. And then now it's great for me to come back to the communities and see, you know, that the kids that I work with, like, you know, some of them are moms as well, right? And they're putting that in, right? So it's kind of like, it is like a generational thing that you're, you know, passing through. And thank you to your leadership. So.
Well, it's really great to have you back in the community, and that's like another source of inspiration and hope for families that are there now, that they can do more than just extract from the environment, but they can do everything that they can to have a really enduring future.
There's so much opportunity right now, and seeing you transform the way people think is cause for hope.
Yes.
And I hope that your story, your success really inspires others to say, well, she can do it. Maybe it can work here too.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, it means a lot to me. It means the world to me for you to say that. But yeah, I mean, I typically say kind of like, you know, just think about like, what story do you want to make, right? Like, you know, just think about this one challenge that you want to work on, right? Of course, you're not going to take on, you know, the whole world, right? You could, like she did. Right? You also can, right? But just, I mean, just imagine the power that, you know, if you took on one story, right? Like this is one challenge that I'm going to work on, and then I'm going to put my head, heart, mind, you know, into it. and whatever you do, right? I mean, you can be an oceanographer, you can be a biologist, but you don't need to be. You can be, hotel manager. You can be, whatever that you do in life. You can be a media person. Whatever that you do in life, you can create that change, right? So yeah.
Well, I think one movement I believe is underway is to look at ocean life as wildlife, not just as something to drag out of the ocean for products or for food. We can eat so many things other than wildlife. It's how we used to feed ourselves with wild plants and wild animals, but we could not prosper with 8 billion people if all of us ate terrestrial wildlife, wild birds, songbirds, little furry things. And now the same is true with the ocean. With so many of us, we can, and we are, emptying the ocean. And we don't have to do that. We can eat other things. We can grow things. We can make different choices. And the fact is, we have to, if we're going to have a planet that continues to.
That's a very big thing in Peru as well. And it also comes on an institutional level, right? So that's where the challenge comes to working on all these different levels. Because institutionally in Peru, again, they are marine resources, right? They're not considered as wildlife, right? So that changes a lot, right? And that changes even thinking about this, 30 by 30, right? And if we're going to be ambitious, we have to make sure that, at the very least, right, which is still not very ambitious, right, but at the very least, within those marine protected areas, those are wildlife, right? They're not resources, right? So there's a lot of work to do, a lot of change, I think, at multiple sectors, right? The corporate sector, the governmental sector, things have to. I'm also like a very big optimist. I think I always try to look at things with a smile. So I think that from my very short career in comparison to yours, Sylvia, I have seen changes, right? Those small little changes happen. We have to go faster, but we can build on those, right? We can build on those and on this a huger community to make things more ambitious and say, like, I mean, this is all what we've achieved in a couple of years.
There are more whales today than there were when I was a kid, because we, generally speaking, have protected them, not killing them on the scale we used to, and more turtles too. So maybe we can look, the kids of today can say 50 years from now, there are more mantas, there are more sharks than when I was a kid.
Yes, that's the goal.
That's the goal. We'll get there. We'll get there.
But now we are at the top of the hour. We're actually a little bit past. This is such a wonderful conversation. And we didn't get a lot of questions today, so we had more conversation. But before we go, we want to say thank you. Thank you, Kerstin, and our producer, Ocean Elders, and to everyone within the diving community who continues to join us and participate in these conversations. Water connects us all, and we're so grateful to everyone. June is National Ocean Month here in the United States, and World Ocean Day is June 8th. And you're going to be like super busy traveling everywhere this month.
Be speaking at the United Nations in
Right?
New York.
And so
I'm going to Greenland, Sylvia. Next week, I'm actually going to be in Greenland looking at climate change.
excellent. So it's like Zoom everywhere this
Like
month.
Manta,
Like a Manta, we're all global travelers, but we're coming back on June 28th with Rich Moy to talk more about echinoderms. Excellent. So until then, stay curious, spend time outside, and remember, take care of the ocean.
As if
your life depends on it.
Because it does.
It does. Happy World Ocean Day, Ocean Month. Get wet, stay curious, and bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.